Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Where we turn our attention next to one of the greatest mysteries of the modern age. Don't worry, don't adjust your radio. It's not 12 o'clock yet. Mystery hour is on the way. But here is a truly unravelable. Is that a word? Not. How is Chris Grayling still a thing? I'm going to give you an earworm now that you won't thank me for, but take it out on Jim Pickard of the Financial Times. I just saw it on his Twitter account. Failing Grayling to the tune of I Am Sailing by Rod Stewart. You won't get that out of your head. Or in fact, don't go there. Don't even start doing it in your own mind. Failing Grayling. No. You won't get it out all day long. He's done it again. And I think even my harshest, most vociferous critics will concede that I have been telling you that the changes Chris Grayling made to the probation service were doomed to fail from pretty much the moment they were announced. This is because I subscribe to something that's desperately unfashionable at the moment called expertise. So when everybody in the judiciary, the prison service and the probation service is queuing up to explain precisely why Chris Grayling's decision to privatise the probation service was pants down ridiculous, and Chris Grayling plus pretty much nobody else except his more intellectually challenged colleagues were seeking to defend it, it seems fairly obvious. And then you get into the reasoning as to why it won't work. The media, by the way, played a huge part in allowing it to work. There was a Daily Mail article which misrepresented the statistics quite horribly under the last editor, inevitably, in order to somehow pave the way for this kind of thing to happen. It's not even controversial anymore to point out that the people who own newspapers and similar institutions have got a lot of money to invest in other things. If you're wondering why Donald Trump has just given a presidential pardon to the former owner of the Daily Telegraph, there's your answer. They are not confined to owning newspapers. They use their newspapers as, if you like, catalysts for their other investments. And they sometimes cross the lines of legality. But in this case, the newspapers, the right-wing newspapers, set the scene for the privatisation of probation because people who actually own nationalised industries have been persuaded by right-wing media that the nationalised industries that they actually own as citizens of this country should be sold to private business. That is Nyrin Bevan's line, isn't it? In a blinking nutshell. And even funnier, of course, the right-wing media that tells British citizens that they should let private capital buy the crown jewels, infrastructure, whether it's rail or energy or, in this case, the probation service. They claim that public ownership is wrong, and then who wades in usually and buys up huge swathes of what was once publicly owned in the United Kingdom? Foreign governments, from China, from Beijing to Paris to Berlin. They've all got a piece of the action of some previously publicly owned British institution. So the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom in 2019 is passionately opposed to public ownership, unless it's foreign public ownership. It's absolutely fine for the French government or the Chinese government or the German government or the Belgian government to buy a fat slice of our energy sector or our railways or even perhaps our probation service. But the idea that the British government should have a piece of the action, that's absolutely outrageous and communist and all sorts of other isms. What's a Chris Grayling-ism? It pretty much means something that has gone obviously, predictably and horribly wrong. Shall we run through a few? Would you like to do this with me? Are we going to do it in ascending order, or are we just going to do it... how are we going to do this? I'd like to have some fun with this story while recognising the fundamental seriousness of the situation. I might invite you to vote for your favourite Grayling failing. Would that work? Do you have a favourite? I mean, some of it's funny. Not if you were the bloke on the bicycle, but when he opened his car door without doing the Dutch reach and sent someone flying, that was a classic Grayling failing. But there's more important stuff as well. 500 million quid's worth of taxpayers' money gone on his privatised probation idea. Is that your favourite Grayling failing? What I'd like you to do on the phones is not bid for... Sorry, Ian. Ian's just started doing that in his head. I am failing to the tune of I Am Sailing. I apologise. Don't blame me. Blame the bloke from the Financial Times. I think we'll do it this way round, with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, but not complete, OK? If I'd been asleep for 3 years and I said to you, why is Chris Grayling still in the cabinet? And we'll run through all the reasons why he shouldn't be momentarily. What would you say? And I kind of want, the reason I say I've only got a little bit of tongue in my cheek is because I want serious answers. It's going to be relevant to Theresa May's very weak grasp on power. It's going to be relevant to the number of people in the cabinet with their knives unsheathed now, waiting to seek to depose her. I don't think Grayling fits into so I don't know what answer you've got. If you're a proper student of the upper echelons of the Conservative Party, you may have an insight that I don't have at the moment. That's what I want you to ring in with. Or is it symptomatic of a broader malaise in British politics? Chris Grayling in many ways represents much of what his critics would actually accuse him of. He is the embodiment of the breakdown between politics and people, the breakdown between actions and consequences. Chris Grayling is the patron saint of the abolition of accountability. Because what is the first thing you teach your children? You teach them the relationship between actions and consequences. You teach them if they do X, Y will happen. If you put your fingers in the plug socket, you'll get electrocuted. If you run into the road without looking, you'll get run over. If you cheek your dad, you'll be sent to your room without any tea. Is that still allowed? If you, what else would you put on that list? Almost everything that we do. You come to work and you've learned those lessons. So if I start swearing now like a trooper, I get dragged off air by my ears. If I commit a libel, I go to court. If I lose all my listeners, I lose my job. If I punch a colleague, I probably get arrested. All of these things speak of the most simple relationship between actions and consequences. So against that background, could you please take a moment out of your morning and tell me, hand on heart, why you think Chris Grayling is still in the cabinet, let alone Parliament? The number you need, and this is a very sincere inquiry, which leaves a little room for levity, but I am looking for proper evidential answers, mostly, 0345 606 0973. I've left myself 3.5 minutes to run through Grayling's failings, which may not be enough. So you use this opportunity to ring in, and I'll start at 13. We've whittled it down from 17. I haven't found out why yet. I'll do that in the break. So 13, benefit claimants working without pay. This is just north or around 4,000 people were expected to be paid back just shy of £2 million in lost benefits after Grayling introduced a new measure that was, it fell foul of British law. So he managed to get it through, and then it got challenged in court, and it turned out to be illegal to expect people to work just for their unemployment benefit. All right, that's quite a small one. That's 13. If this was a slightly less successful radio station, I would now be playing in the background the theme tune that Fluff Freeman used to employ when he was doing the top 10. Remember that? Don't play it, Jones. At 12. Are these in any particular order, or is it they're not in order of gravity or chronology or anything like that? They're just the producer's personal favourites. That's perfectly acceptable behaviour. £200 million jail maintenance contract. This was when Chris Grayling was Justice Secretary. He gave £200 million to Carillion to run facilities management in prison. You'll remember that in 2018, Carillion collapsed, at which point Justice Minister Rory Stewart admitted that the deal had been completely unsustainable. So think about that, all right? I don't know what you do for a living, but whatever you have ever been in charge of, imagine if the person before you had done something that was demonstrably and clearly completely unsustainable. And then they got promoted. That's Grayling failing number 12. At 11, he presided over a £5.9 million deal with Saudi Arabia in order to help them run their prisons. Saudi Arabia, one of the most brutal and barbaric regimes on the planet, but to Chris Grayling, a business opportunity. That's not unique, of course, in Conservative circles. But even by the standards of Conservative complicity in international human rights abuses, Chris Grayling went too far and the deal was dropped in October 2015 after a cabinet row. But he's still in the cabinet. At 10, 2013, again as Justice Secretary, and I really recommend the book by The Secret Barrister that will equip you with there's a reason why it's a massive bestseller. It's not my little effort into a cocked hat. Almost makes me regret giving them a quote for the cover. But it gives you chapter and verse on this. You read that book, you can't be surprised by any aspect of this story except the fact that Chris Grayling still has a job. So we go back to 2013. He introduced fees of up to £1,200 if you wanted to sue your own boss. In other words, telling the great British working public that if you want to actually take action against an exploitative or abusive employer, you need to have over £1,000 spare. I learnt this morning in a completely unrelated story that the average millennial has a maximum of £500 in readily accessible savings. So this is created, as I told you at the time, I remember telling you that at the time, this is designed to give bosses the power over workers that they had in pre-trade union times. It took 4 years for the Supreme Court to rule that the fees were unlawful, and the government was forced to repay £27 million to around 100,000 people. I apologise, we've only done the first 4. We've got 9 to go, and these are just the producer's personal favourites. Have we kept a running tally of how much money we've already covered? Let me do it in my head like a genius. 1.9 million there, 200 million there, that's 201.9 million, fact fans. Another 5.9 million there, that's 201.9 plus 6, 207.8. And then another 27 million here, 234.8 million pounds, and we've only just got into the bottom of the top 10. And Chris Grayling is still in the cabinet. Now, I don't care whether you're a Conservative, a Labour supporter, a Liberal Democrat, a Green, whatever it may be, I don't care. I want you to tell me why, in your view, Chris Grayling is still in the cabinet. Because if you did this at work, not only would you be out of a job, you'd probably never work again. There are 3 phone lines free and 9 entries left in the greatest failings of Chris Grayling. What should we do? Take a call first and then crack on with the failings? I think in the interests of... So grab your phone line if you want. The question is simple. As we run through a frankly astonishing catalogue of catastrophe presided over by a man who must surely be the worst cabinet minister in living memory, quite possibly ever, although that always runs the risk of some mad Victorian coming into the game at the last minute. How is he still in a job? You can be as serious or as silly as you like in your answer to this question, although I lean a little bit towards serious. 11:19 is the time. Rick's in Sheffield. Rick, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Nice to chat to you again. I've got a couple of points to make, and I have an analogy who is still in government, which I want to think about. So, first thing, I think the answer to your question is, why is he still in government? He's a human shield. He sits there, takes the flak for basically he is the person who sits there and takes the abuse. He gets things wrong. He bumbles through everything almost like a cartoon character. Yes. But he is the one that goes on Newsnight. He is the one who gets all the interviews, and actually it makes the government what you might call accountable. And
do you know what you've done? You've raised a very, very uncomfortable notion.
We are not talking about more important things.
No. I know you're right. I know you're right. I mean, with the greatest of love and respect, that bit was a bit obvious. But what you didn't realise you were doing was portraying Chris Grayling as being brilliant at something.
I think he and a few other people who I'll talk about in a second are, because they're doing their job absolutely perfectly if you define their job as something that we don't think it is.
If you don't define their job as Secretary of State for Justice, if you don't define their job as Transport Secretary, if you don't define their job as the job description that they have in the Cabinet, you define their job instead, as you say, as a firewall or a... I want a slightly ruder description without being profane. The person at whom all of the manure gets thrown. He's a professional manure magnet. There we go.
Yep.
But what you've done, Rick, is... No, mate, because we can't let this pass. He's arguably the best manure magnet in the history of British politics.
I think he's the second best one. Let me give you a better example, and someone who's been rewarded handsomely for it. I think Jeremy Hunt is actually slightly better. He absolutely ravaged the NHS, and that's from first-hand experience with my father, is a professor in the NHS, speaking about it. Sitting there, he rearranged it in a completely I'm not going to say pro-Tory, because that's not fair on some people, but a pro-neoconservative rearrangement which fundamentally runs down the NHS and puts under stress. He sat there, he took the abuse, the rhyming nicknames, all these things, and he got paid off by being made Foreign Secretary, which is the most prestigious role in government outside the PM.
I'm not having it, mate. I mean, with the greatest of love and respect, they're not even on the same page. Jeremy Hunt in ordinary times would be a contender for the worst member of Cabinet, and you're right, he got promoted after presiding over a period of NHS history that very few NHS workers would describe as anything other than catastrophic. But Chris Grayling, mate, we haven't even got to number 9 yet on the top 13, and he's already in the hole for nearly 300 million quid.
Oh, sure.
Hunt's bad. Hunt's bad, but Grayling is Grayling, and Grayling deserves a noun of his own.
Both the rhyming slang for him and also like.
Oh no! Stop it with Hunt. You can't use that as rhyming slang in polite conversation. Are you coming to my gig on Saturday, Rick? He says, knowing that you're not. You're probably doing something more. I'm in Sheffield on Saturday night, Richard. Sheffield Hallam University, mate. There's about 8 tickets left. Grab them while you can. I'll put a link on my Twitter account. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. At 9. This particularly gets my goat because it features God's own country, Kidderminster. May I just give a special shout-out to the anonymous listener who sent me the Kidderminster Ale Trail pamphlet today that's been published by Camera. It's pubs within walking distance of the rail and bus stations in Kidderminster. It's one of the finest things ever to arrive in the post. But here is another story from Kidderminster. A 32-year-old woman from my hometown had to pay £300, including a £150 fine, after being convicted of stealing a 75-pence pack of Mars bars because she had not eaten in days. This was followed by more than 50 magistrates quitting in disgust after the scheme Grayling introduced in April 2015 became law. These were court fees that were accused of making innocent people plead guilty. Months after he left office, they were scrapped. So, essentially, if you pleaded guilty, you would get potentially a smaller punishment than you would if you pleaded innocent and got found guilty. Now, that in and of itself sounds quite straightforward. And indeed, it's called plea bargaining, isn't it, in the context of American criminal justice? But if you've got no money, you've got no choice. So not only did he take away free tribunals and introduce fees of up to £1,200, he also, for someone so skint they stole a 75 pence of Mars bars, 75 pence pack of Mars bars, said, what's a £300 fine for you? Well done, Christopher. Prisoner tagging, do you remember that? A £23 million contract to a firm for a bespoke prisoner tracking scheme to give Britain, he said, one of the most advanced GPS tagging systems in the world. His successor at Justice, Michael Gove, overturned it immediately after the vast majority of the money had already been spent. How has he still got a job? I'd quite like a Conservative lawyer list to tell me. I'm going for manure magnet. I'll take a pithier phrase than that if you've got one. Richard, another one, is in Tiverton. Richard, what would you like to say?
You're wrong, mate. He's got an absolutely wonderful record, but you have to understand...
I think we can't... No, stop talking. You just said a rude word, so people listening will wonder why the tape just went a bit funny. We dumped that. Well, manure is a perfectly acceptable word.
Okay, all right, manure.
Carry on.
Okay, I'm sorry, it was a slip.
You're on a yellow card. Be warned.
Right, okay. If you think about what is the overarching objective of the neoliberal Conservative Party, it can be summed up in 3 words: smash the state.
There's a problem with your analysis and your vocabulary, but the problem with the analysis is that a lot of the things he did got reversed immediately by his successors. So while I quite like the idea of a conspiracy to carve up the state and sell it off to the highest bidder, Gove and Rory Stewart both undid things that he did, and they're members of the same, in your worldview, the same neoliberal conspiracy.
James, the problem with saying, oh no, it's not a conspiracy.
No, I didn't say that. I just said 2 senior cabinet ministers undid the things that he did. So the idea that it's a Conservative plan looks a little bit shaky in the context of that evidence.
I rescind the word plan. I didn't actually use it, but I didn't use the plan. What I'm saying is the political discourse, the direction of travel is the Washington consensus of shrinking the state, outsourcing as much as possible, and introducing as market forces as far as you can go. That wonderful book, history...
Why did he ban books, then? With Francis Fukuyama?
Oh, no,
why did he ban books?
You have to take into account that the man is also peculiar and has his own ideas about things. But what Grayling does is he enables the Conservative Party to see how hard it can push against public services, how far it can go. And every now and then he goes too far and they have to rein it back in.
Works.
Rory Stewart's brought in to sort out the mess.
No, that works. That works. He is like a canary down the common or an outlier. Moving the economic equivalent of the Overton window just a little bit further, and everyone laughs at him. But actually, it's moved. The window has moved. We now contemplate privatising probation.
And Paying billions and billions of pounds in wasted money is a price worth paying to vast numbers of Tories and neoliberals on the right. They see it as an investment now against the future where we move to an American type of model where government consists of a bunch of blokes who sit down and make a decision about which contract is going to which company once a year. That's what Grayling's about, and he is hugely successful in what he does.
All right, so I'll take that, actually. I think that's a fairly compelling analysis in the end. Terrifying, of course. He's not only the finest manure magnet that British politics has ever seen, but he's also quite deliberately and cynically softening up the population for policies that have failed miserably on his watch, but which, of course, could come back in a new suit and get through the front door. 28 minutes after 11. Here is Ice. This is one of the reasons why I love checking out your contributions to the programme. Martin has had a terrible experience this morning, or relatively recently. He lost his mother recently, so our condolences to you for that, Martin. But he goes on, whilst clearing out the house, James, I unearthed the match day programme for the Royal Grammar School in High Wycombe, RGS High Wycombe's 1978 school prize giving. And Martin had a bit of a frisson when he stumbled across this document because his name featured. He was an award winner. He goes on, sadly, the awards currency plunged faster than the Zimbabwean dollar when I saw who won the history prize. Hashtag Christopher Grayling. So you had some talent once. I don't know what happened. Maybe our conspirators are correct and it's all part of a grand, if not plan, then at least process. But for me, in any other job, we've only got up to 8. I just mentioned the book ban. Why would you ban books for prisoners? It cost 72 grand for the government to defend that case. He's still in a job. That was in 2014. Remember when Virgin Trains took over a franchise? The government decided to end it 3 years early, and coming up in 2020. This would cost the taxpayers labour estimated, so you can take that with a pinch of salt if you want, £2 billion in lost payments to the Treasury. So what happened was a joint venture between Stagecoach and Virgin said, we'll do that for X. They had a crack at doing it, couldn't do it for X, and said, we're not going to do it anymore. So the government had to step in. Chris Grayling presided over that. Number 5, he took out a cyclist with his door. I'm reluctant to laugh about that because it happened to my brother-in-law once and it really smarts. Number 4, cancelled trains in the north of England cost businesses nearly £38 million. This was last summer, the train title launch when he was Transport Secretary. You remember he said he doesn't have any responsibility for trains. Presumably positing the notion that trains aren't transport. And sticking with transport, we've got drones, ferries, and not sticking with transport, probation. Got 10 or 11 more minutes on this, and then we're going to speak to a businessman who seems to me to have slotted rather neatly into the model of what I would like to see more businessmen do. I think, like most people, I've always found entrepreneurship fascinating. It takes some real guts to set yourself up in business and to run the risk of losses. But it also, of course, comes with much greater rewards than simply ploughing your own, simply working for somebody else. And when you see someone making a ton of money in the current context of cuts, austerity, you've got people marching up and down the country now claiming simultaneously that Brexit is going to cause us economic harm, but somehow we'll be richer and we'll be able to spend all that money on high streets and stuff. Astonishing encounter in Wales yesterday where one of these people was actually asked to name the benefits for the Welsh and started blathering on about all sorts of nonsense. I'll try and dig that clip out for you. But the bottom line, of course, is that if we're going to be poorer after Brexit, there's going to be less money for everybody to go around. And that's why I like businessmen who appear to recognise the importance of spreading it around. And we're going to meet the guy who set up Richer Sounds in about 10 minutes' time because he has made a decision to essentially hand over much of his business as he nears retirement to his workforce. I'm quite looking forward to that. Before that, and probably after that as well, Chris Grayling, how much do you think the drone scare at Gatwick cost that he had been warned about? I think that's the crucial point. He had been warned about it. Between 50 and 70 million pounds. Don't ask me how. Of course, if I was a lazy right-wing newspaper columnist, I would now say they could have spent that money on catching murderers or dealing with knife crime, as if, every pound that is spent on policing is somehow either or. They had to spend that money on drones because Chris Grayling ignored the warnings. And then my personal favourite, the ferries. Seaborne Freight awarded a contract to do some shipping despite not having any ships. We discovered live on this programme that the terms and conditions on Seaborne Freight's website had been cut and pasted from a takeaway website. I don't get anything like the recognition I deserve for doing all this digging. It's because the rest of the media is so horribly right-wing. We read it out, compared it like for like. They'd cut and pasted the terms and conditions from a takeaway website and left in a couple of words by accident that proved the point. That fell apart, of course, because, lo and behold, a shipping company without any ships was not very well equipped to do much shipping. And then, of course, the contract had been awarded in expectation of a no-deal Brexit, which didn't even happen. In fact, Brexit didn't even happen. So that £13.8 million went straight down the toilet, followed swiftly by £33 million that the government had to give to Eurotunnel because they'd given the contract to Seaborne Freight and others without allowing Eurotunnel to bid for it. So even when doing something idiotic, such is Chris Grayling's peculiar genius, that even when doing something catastrophically idiotic, he accidentally did something even more idiotic. So by giving the contract to Seaborne Freight, the shipping company without any ships, without inviting Eurotunnel, the tunnel company with a very big tunnel, to bid for the contract, he compounded the catastrophic error of giving the shipping contract to a company without any ships by not asking the tunnel company with a very big tunnel whether they would like to bid for the transport contracts that the shipping company without any ships had been given. And that cost you £33 million. Again, if I was a lazy right-wing tabloid columnist, I'd suggest that that money could have been spent on solving knife crime. But I'm not, so I won't. But I will ask you how Chris Grayling still has a job. 0345 6060 973. Martin is in Reading. Martin, what is going on?
Hi there.
Hello, mate.
Hi, mate. Well, I think the short answer to your question, and I take all your points, and all very valid to a point, is that the reason Mr. Grayling is still there is because his local constituents, the local voter, allows him to be there. We have a system in this country that says you go to a polling station, put a cross in the box, pick your man or your woman, and they will get in if they get the most votes.
Yes.
This country now runs on a system of apathy. I have experience of local government, and it works on the basis that probably 30% or less will vote, and out of that percentage, maybe 12 or 15% will get somebody into power. So the people to blame are ourselves, the voter, the good old British public, who, by and large, sits back and allows the likes of Mr. Grayling just to
We
carry on making the sorts of mistakes he makes.
always did, though. Apart from Neil Hamilton back in the day, it's very, very hard to think of a stone-cold constituency where you would have weighed the vote, turning on a member of Parliament from the preferred party for personal stroke political reasons, isn't it? I mean, Grayling's not exceptional in that sense. You've got incredibly rubbish politicians up and down the country of every hue and party who, well, you know what the phrase is as well as I do, they weigh the vote. It doesn't matter. You could stick a rosette on a monkey, they often say, and it would still romp home in certain constituencies. So I don't know if that singles out Grayling. Well, it's everyone's fault, but it's not Grayling specific, is it?
No, he's part of a system. He's part of a quite elite system, as I'm sure you know the answer to the question about how MPs get put in front of the constituency as a whole. There's been a very sort of wavy process to get them in front of the voter, and as you probably quite rightly have said, most of those people wouldn't sort of make level B or C in your average job. You know.
I find that heartbreakingly true at the moment. I don't think it used to be true.
They wouldn't make the grade.
No, they wouldn't. And politics, for a variety of reasons, seems to attract in us. Well, I don't even know if that's fair. The people who prosper most in politics at the moment seem to be the loudest and the least talented. But there are still plenty of politicians, Conservative and Labour and SNP and all of the others, Green in Caroline Lucas's case, who do a great job, but something about my business has broken that model. Something about the media has started rewarding the people with the loudest voices and the strongest opinions, regardless of evidence, reality and facts. And I don't know that Grayling necessarily falls into that category. He falls more into that manure magnet, doesn't he? Where why has he still got a job? Because who else is Theresa May going to send out to defend the latest catastrophe that he wasn't actually responsible for? Because he does that as well.
But he's part of a system that picks people from Oxford or
No,
Cambridge
I get that. No, I completely get that. I'm not arguing with you for the record.
Drags them through. No, you're absolutely right. But I'm interested to hear your next piece on the business. But I used to be in business. I ran my own business, but I was also a local county elected member.
Oh, yes.
But one of the issues that mitigates against people with common sense getting into local government or into government is time and money.
Yes.
It's a starker reality is that you can't do both. If you
No,
want to be
you're not going to win many prizes for suggesting that politicians need to be paid more money. But if you are successful in one field, but not silly money, not like lottery money success, you made enough never have to worry about your income again, which describes a few members of the cabinet, actually. I think most notably probably Jeremy Hunt, Philip Hammond and possibly Theresa May's husband. And I don't mean that in a sexist way. I just mean that as a husband. I look at our financial situation and what's mine is hers, what's hers is mine. So she doesn't have to worry about income either, which means politics for people who might expect to be drawing down £250,000 to £500,000 a year becomes a very, very, very unattractive option. Whereas for people who've got 5, 10, 15 million pounds in the bank after flogging their business or doing some trading or cashing in their investments in developing countries, they can afford to do it. That's a conversation for a different day. But you're right, Great Grayling is clearly a beneficiary of that. But he's an ex-journalist, mate, so he can't be that well off.
Well, he will be when he leaves government.
Whoa, and there it is. I think you're probably right, although we will have to wait and see. And that really would be, in a rational universe, the most cutting condemnation of any political system. Will Chris Grayling really march out of a cabinet career that I think, by all accounts, can be roundly described as one of the worst in the history of politics and get richly rewarded in the private sector? Keith's nodding. A couple of you noticed I mentioned Jones earlier. Jones was making a brief cameo. Keith had some business to attend to, but a lot of you were concerned. Keith is back. And he's nodding. Of course Chris Grayling will. I mean, look at George Osborne. By no means comparable to Chris Grayling in the incompetence stakes, but he didn't exactly cover himself in glory, what with losing the referendum and introducing austerity for entirely ideological reasons. He's got more jobs than I can count now. I've actually lost count of the number of jobs he has, including editing. It's so hard in this business now to stay friends with people. So I was about to be really, really rude about what's happened to the London Evening Standard. It was bad enough under Boris Johnson's cheerleader, Sarah Sands, the last editor, who, of course, by dint of being scrupulously impartial, now edits a Radio 4 current affairs programme. It was bad enough then. But what George Osborne has done to it, I need to add a caveat. Apart from the bits of it that are written by people I like and respect, they're still all right. Paper as a whole, whew, some of the rumours one hears about the processes by which certain stories are selected for publication or certain stories are parked. Yeah. So he gets rewarded after presiding over catastrophic political failure. Don't be surprised if Chris Grayling turns up soon on the board of a private sector company near you. And it is, I think it's fair to say, a staple of the high street. And certainly in my younger days, before I had to spend all my money on stuff for the children instead of my own man cave and important accoutrements, I could often be found poring over the contents of Richer Sounds. To my embarrassment, I didn't realise that the founder had used his own name. His name is, indeed was, Julian Richer, and he announced to staff last week that he had transferred 60% of his shares into a John Lewis-style trust. He recently turned 60, so presumably there is either one eye on the horizon of a more leisurely life or new projects, and he says the time was right to pass the baton to the chain's 531 employees. Julian Richer joins me on the line now. I should add that you're also the author of The Ethical Capitalist, Julian, which might have given a clue to this latest chapter in your life. But let's just begin with the why. Why have you done this? You could have kept it all for yourself, man.
Well, James, thank you. Thank you for having me, first of all. I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do, and I think it's best for the company's future. I thought it was prudent because my father dropped down dead when he was 60. I was 60 a few weeks ago. And my colleagues know the company best and really deserve it. And I thought, therefore, securing the future, that was the right decision.
So, I mean, you're being a little bit modest. You haven't addressed the issue of why you, unlike many entrepreneurs and businessmen in your position, don't operate in a way that allows you to keep as much of your company and its profits as is possible.
Okay, we have far more than we need, and you know, we're very blessed and very lucky. And I'm not giving up work, by the way. I'm really excited about new things I can do. And I thought the time was right. I think people have to know and accept, you know, time to move on. And particularly as my father dropped down dead very suddenly. My wife was quite anxious. I have a wonderful wife, but she would admit she's not madly commercial, and she was anxious about what might happen if I predeceased her. And the banks obviously get very nervous when the founder dies, and supplier insurance dries up. So just the right thing to do.
So, I mean, you walk away with a handsome sum, but you also plough a lot of it back into the company, including £1,000 for every year that your staff have worked for you. Why? I mean, I love Richer Sounds. I mean, just for the record, the staff in the branch on Chiswick High Road are exemplary, as I'm sure you know. Every branch, I used to go to the one in Birmingham near the Bullring, and that was really years and years ago. There's something about it that's different from other shops. What do you think it is?
Okay, well, I've been doing this for 40 years, man and boy, and I've learned a few things over 40 years, but the one overriding thing I've learned is it's all about the people, and what I mean by that is that the output from people can vary hugely depending on how you treat them.
Yes.
And I think that's often missed. So I've wrote a book about motivating people 25 years ago, but I'm probably not allowed to mention that.
Of course you are. No, you are. What was it?
Okay, it's called The Richer Way, and it still sells and sold very well. It's sort of a bit of a cult book amongst maybe people.
I plug my own book at least 17 times an hour, so it's only fair that you can plug your own as well.
I don't feel so bad, but I do really believe in motivating people and treating them well, and I think that's absolutely key. And so, may I just explain that the movement over to the trust was one thing, and that's for the future, and I think that's really important. And we're going to work. We already have a colleague council. We don't change any terms and conditions without consulting them. So we're going to come up with a profit share scheme. But the money I paid out, just to make it quite clear, has come out of my own pocket. It's actually closer to £4 million. So the maths is I've got 500 odd colleagues, as you rightly said, who've worked an average of 8 years. So that's just about £4 million out of my own pocket. And incidentally, excluding directors, this is for the non-director colleagues. So I've got a lot of people who work hard, a lot of people who are loyal, but the guys at the coalface, they're all on the real living wage or more. But obviously directors are on six-figure salaries, and I felt it was right to give them a loyalty thank you celebration bonus, quite separate to the transition. And that's cost me expensive morning on Tuesday, but very satisfying. And I think my colleagues are pretty gobsmacked. So
some of whom, of course, I think 39 have more than 20 years service, so it's a life-changing sum of money for them. I sense that I don't want to be political, and I don't expect you either would or would want to criticise anybody else specifically.
Go on.
But I'm quite a naive fellow sometimes when it comes to business and entrepreneurship, and I've always presumed that the two things you just said should be self-evident. The better you treat people, the more they will produce, and ultimately the more that will be
complicated, is it?
Well, I wouldn't have thought so. So why do so few people do it like this, and why is it hard over the course of the last 100 years to name pretty much off the top of my head anyone else that's followed the John Lewis model, which you have done in a sense?
I'd love to take all the credit, but I'm not the only person out there. But I'm part of a small club. So can I tell you there are two reasons, if I may, that I've had the same thoughts as you, James. So there are two reasons. One is scale. When companies get huge, when you have to pass the cleaners in the morning on your way into the office, you care about them, whether they're being well treated or not. At least I did. Yeah. When you're investing in mines in Angola, do you really care about the conditions of the miners? So there's a problem there with scale, I think, just geography. And the second thing is shareholders. The system we have at the moment, and let me make it quite clear, I haven't come up with a better system than capitalism, so I wrote my book about trying to make it, responsible capitalism being the way. So the system we have at the moment is that shareholders invest in companies, and they want dividends twice a year, they want increasing profits all the time, and therefore the boards of directors are under a lot of pressure to deliver that. And that gives them a short-term view. I've got a long-term view, and that means I've got to invest in my colleagues, and I get long-term benefits. So I think shareholders can be a negative, although I accept that's the system we have, and geography and scale as well.
And I get that. And again, it answers the question of why more people should do it, and it answers part of the question of why more people don't. But I'd love to know, finally, over the course of that 40-year career, and I don't put any words into your mouth, has that model you described got better or worse in general business?
In other businesses, you mean?
Yeah.
I hope it's improving. I mean,
Really?
I hope so. I mean, there's been a phenomenal response to this little story. I mean, I'm quite amazed. Maybe people are looking for a solution, looking for another way. And I noticed the ranking of my books on Amazon have gone through the roof.
Fantastic.
Maybe people are buying it as a present to me. But can I just give you some
Please.
Because they're naysayers and traditionalists who might think, spending money on colleagues is rubbish, it's trendy, it's liberal. But there's real financial benefits. So not not only do I sleep better at night, which is very nice, but I do believe the business has thrived because of it. And I can give you one example, if I may. I know we haven't got... I can talk about this forever. But one example, we have 12 holiday homes for our colleagues, and over 70% of the entire workforce use at least one holiday home a year, which I'm very proud of. Oh. Okay, so... the bank manager I had when I bought my first home said I was mad when I asked for a mortgage. He said, you don't need to do this. I said, well, that's exactly why I'm doing it. And he didn't get it, okay? But let me give you an example. In retail, shrinkage, you know what that is? That's theft.
Yes.
It's typically between 1% and 2% of turnover. Now, I turn over 200 million quid. So that's quite a few million pounds a year.
Change, yeah.
Between 2 and 4 million quid. Our shrinkage is 0.1%. So I'm saving millions of pounds a year just because my colleagues hopefully feel the boss isn't a bad geezer, he looks after us, I'm not going to nick from him. So that pays for holiday homes many times over. So that's just one example. And it's a financial payback as well as sleeping better at night. Sorry.
It's a brilliant one. And
thank you.
Finally, do you have any heroes?
Yeah, for sure I do. So Anita Roddick was ahead of her time. The late Anita Roddick, remember, founder of Body Shop. She was terrific and concerned about the environment long before any of us. Charles Dunstan, who just completely dominated in a good way the mobile phone sector when he grew the company very, very quickly. Yes. I mean, to a much bigger company than mine. We've got people like James Timpson, who are the biggest employers of ex-offenders in this country, and I'm hugely respectful and fond of him. And Archie Norman, who did the biggest turnaround, for instance, at Asda in the early 90s, you know, the biggest in British retail history, and got very little financial reward for it. Incredibly bright, amazing, very hard worker, a lot of integrity. And he's now chairman at Marks & Spencer, where I'm working. I don't know if you know, I'm coaching the chief executive. He calls me his guru, which makes me sound a bit old, but anyway.
I love it. Just so you know, Matt's been in touch to say, please let Julian know I've just bought his book based on what he's been saying during this interview. So we're all ready. There you go. We're up and running. I just wondered whether you were familiar with William Whiteley's story, because when you mentioned the holiday homes, there's a village, I think, somewhere in Surrey that Whiteley, because Whiteley's in Bayswater was a department store, he built a whole village for his retired staff. So
amazing.
There's a history.
In Yorkshire, James, where I'm living now, and with my Yorkshire wife, and we have Titus Salt up there, and Saltaire, very similar thing. And we have Roundtrees and Terriers families, Quakers, who are very benevolent. So absolutely, I'd love to try and follow in their footsteps.
You can care for your colleagues and make a ton of money. That's the message.
I've got more than I need.
Julian Mitchell, I'm so happy this interview lived up to expectations. Thank you so much.
Very kind.
Being such a top fella, and thank you for equipping me with hi-fi equipment over the years, and indeed, I think I bought my last Sonos speaker from you, so you could, long may it continue. It's just coming out to 11:59. Crikey, the time flew on that one. Julian's books, as you heard, will be available on Amazon, but also from your local independent bookshops, where you will be able to order them, and they will bust them in. I love stuff like that. You know, I get a bit dewy-eyed sometimes about people doing stuff they don't have to do. It's becoming my new mantra. Doing something good that you don't have to do. It's bound to make you feel better. You could set it up if you wanted, and I'm not suggesting for a minute that Julian would go along with this. I don't know anything about his politics or his personal life. But it's the polar opposite of what I would call Trumpism, where everything you do is designed for your own personal benefit. You can combine the two and know that you'll be running a better, more successful business if your workforce are really happy and well rewarded, rather than looking for opportunities to save a few pence at every turn. You look for opportunities to create a happier workforce, and the happier workforce translates into bigger profits and much lower shrinkage. I really enjoyed that. I've got a new hero.